Well, hello everybody out there. This is Bongo from the HOWL Wildlife Photography Convention. Welcome to another one of our live streams. Today we are going to be speaking with one of our keynote speakers, Sam Stevens. We're going to have on the program here. And Sam, you're on the call right now. How are you doing?
Hi, Bongo. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm just doing fantastic. Thank you for asking. So, you've had some exciting things happening. You were just at a conference or something like that recently?
That's right. Yeah, I just got back from the NAMPA conference. So, the North American Nature Photography Association puts on a summit every 2 years. So, I was just in sunny Arizona for that.
In sunny Arizona for that. All right. And give me a little bit of a summary of what happens at that gathering.
Yeah, well, they have some great keynote speakers there. So we had a keynote, the one that impacted me the most was about collaboration. So collaborating with different kinds of people to do photo projects. They have a lot of breakout sessions, they have a lot of field trips. So they bring you to some of the natural places around the summit location so you can photograph while you're there. And then for me, the best part of an event like that is being able to meet up with my colleagues and reconnect and have conversations about our work. So,
Very
yeah.
cool. And then, speaking of conventions, you're one of our keynote speakers at HOWL happening on November 3rd, 4th, and 5th of
Yeah.
2023. How does that feel? What was going through your head when we sent you the email reaching out to you?
Yeah, I was so excited and honored to be invited to be a part of HOWL because, of course, Algonquin Park has a very special place in my heart, which I'm sure I'll end up talking about later on in our chat. I've spent many seasons at the Wildlife Research Station there. But aside from that, it's pretty rare to have an opportunity to come together in person with so many photographers to learn from each other and share our interest in our craft. So I'm really glad that you created this local opportunity and that we can all come together and have this experience. And I know I'll learn a lot from the other speakers and also from the other participants. So, and have fun at the same time. So, looking forward to it.
For sure. And you've basically summarized it all. Okay, and then Richard's online watching our talk right here. Good evening, Richard. Richard has attended two Howls and has also presented on our live stream before as well. So, welcome into the live stream, Richard. And yeah, you're right. I mean, wildlife photographers are a little bit of a lonely bunch. They can be because we're isolated in the wilderness, hanging out with, most of the time by ourselves, and then the odd time there's an animal that strolls on by, right?
Yeah, the odd time.
Yeah, when you're lucky, yeah. And so part of one of the reasons why we wanted to feature you at HOWL 2023 is we love that you have a background in biology. Can you just tell us a little bit more about
Mhm.
your biology background?
Yeah, so, people often ask me, like, why did I become a biologist? And I don't really have a good answer to that question. I mean, really, just growing up in school, science was my favorite subject. And, when you get to that age where you're thinking about what you're going to do as a career, science just seemed like the obvious answer for me. And I honestly don't think I ever considered anything else. So, where that love of science initially came from, I don't know. Maybe I had some kind of formative experience that I don't remember, but for me, it kind of feels like I was just born with this fascination for the natural world. And so in my early years in university, I was pretty torn between actually biology and chemistry and physical geography because I just love all the natural sciences. But ultimately, I really enjoyed being outside and working outside. So that's kind of what made me gravitate towards biology and pursue that. So, yeah, I did my undergraduate in biology and then I went on and pursued a master's as well.
Amazing. Hey, I share the same love of the outdoors. A lot of us do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you became a photographer. So can you
Yeah.
can you run us through how that all came about?
Right? Yeah, I didn't see it coming, neither did my parents. They're very supportive of it, thankfully. But yeah, that one is a little bit more of a clear answer. When I was doing my master's degree in biology, that's kind of the point in your science career where, instead of being in a classroom and learning from textbooks, you conduct your own research project. And so I was working on that and surrounded by peers and professors who were doing research on all kinds of really fascinating topics. And, having my friends and family ask, like, so what do you do exactly? And, trying to explain that. I think in general, I just started paying attention to the huge potential that existed to engage non-scientists in science. And that wasn't really being focused on at the time that I was in academia. I mean, it's something that people value a lot more now, and that's great. That field is really growing. And at the same time, I also started to see really great science storytelling. So I think the best example that impacted me most profoundly was a documentary called Chasing Ice. And yeah,
I've heard of
you're
it.
nodding. So I think, yeah. So it tells a story of a photographer named James Baylog, and he goes on this mission to install time lapse cameras that visually show people glaciers receding. Um,
Hmm.
and so, yeah, it's a really impactful story. And I just thought, wow, like visual storytelling is this really powerful tool to connect non-scientists to science, and especially science that's applicable to conservation issues or some of the other major issues that are facing people today. So I just knew that that's what I wanted to do, so I switched to photography.
That's great, but I
Yeah.
love that uh, it's still so relevant, like you said, connecting to connecting the science to non-scientists, and then you're really the conduit between those two groups, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
that is so cool. And of course, you've been at WRS for a while. So can you tell us more about WRS? Because a lot of people know about the visitor center, they know about all the campgrounds, they know about the canoe routes and the backpacking trail, and then there's this hidden thing called WRS. What is that?
Yeah, so the WRS, which stands for Wildlife Research Station, it is a physical place. So it's a collection of these rustic cabins within Algonquin Park, but it operates independently from the park as a nonprofit organization. And its purpose is to support wildlife research and also provide experiential education, so like hands-on learning for early career people in wildlife research. So they do this in a number of different ways. So they host researchers who are working on all kinds of different projects, but especially there's a few very long-term wildlife monitoring projects. So this year is the 72nd year of the small mammal monitoring project, which is pretty amazing that, every year for 72 years, the scientists have collected data about small mammal populations, which tell us a lot about the forest ecosystem. And so, yeah, they host researchers. They also host field courses. So these field courses can be from various universities, but sometimes they're independently led, and they could be for professionals, but also just interested members who maybe don't do wildlife science professionally, but want to participate in conservation or citizen science projects. Um, and so last year, the station hosted a new course, and this course was created and run by multiple university graduate students um, who built this course to teach field skills to undergrad students who self identify as racialized. So the course is called FREED for short, but it stands for Field Research in Ecology and Evolution Diversified. So through this opportunity for undergraduate students with that background to come and learn field skills, they're hoping to diversify the field of wildlife science. So that's something that the station was really excited to host. And then lastly, the station tries to connect people with the wildlife research that is happening there. And so we do have a newsletter, and we have a presence on social media, and we have an annual research report that summarizes all the updates and findings from the research that's meant for a public audience. And we also put together I say we because I've been involved at the station now. So I guess by we, I mean the station, puts together an in-person event with the Friends of Algonquin Park called Meet the Researcher Day. And of course, we haven't been able to have it with COVID, but this year it'll be happening. The date will be announced soon. And that's an awesome event because the researchers come out from the station, but also other local organizations, and have a booth and get to tell people all about the wildlife that they study, how they study that wildlife, do some demos. There's barbecue, raffle. So really the station is this invaluable place where researchers can come and do their research. We can provide all these different opportunities for education, both for professionals and for connecting to the public.
That's amazing. That's great. I almost wish more people knew about the WRS, but I mean, like with the Meet the Researcher Day, like all those little initiatives, the diversity initiative, I think that is also incredible as well. So good work to all of the researchers there. And I was telling you earlier, just before we hopped on this call, that I've met some of them as well here in Whitney, and it's always a good group, and the work that they do is really important. What have you photographed at WRS?
Many things. That's kind of one of the
Tell me all about it.
things about the Wildlife Research Station is that there's all kinds of different projects happening simultaneously. So for me, I found myself at the station in 2019 because I was working on my own photography project on wolves, which is still ongoing. And I was kind of looking for a way that I could stay in the Algonquin area. And so I ended up talking to the station manager, Kevin, who's still there today. And we came up with a lot of ways that, my work could really help the station. And so I came on as someone doing communications for the station. And then I, being at the station, could also work on my own photography projects. So yeah, I have photographed, in addition to the small mammal project, which is the longest running project at the station, there is also impressively long-running turtle project. So I think that one is in its 52nd year this year. So it's over 50 years where researchers have been following both snapping turtles and painted turtles. So if you've ever done a hike on the Mizzy Lake Trail in Algonquin, you'll notice that in Wolf Howell Pond and West Rose Pond there, a lot of the turtles have numbers on them, and that's so that the researchers can follow them over the season when they're nesting, when they're basking, and collect all kinds of individual data, which allows them to answer a lot of really fascinating questions. And turtles live a long time. So having a research project that is 50 years old for turtles, is really young still. There's some snapping turtles that were tagged in the first years of the study that are, still around today. So that's one of my favorite projects to photograph there. And then there's also been a long-term salamander research project that's a little bit younger than the others. It started around 2009. And so they're monitoring the body condition of salamanders and relating that to climate change. So there's been some interesting questions that are being investigated there. And then kind of a serendipitous discovery that was made recently, of course, that probably many people know about by now, is pitcher plants in Algonquin Park being found to be consuming juvenile spotted salamanders. So that was a really fun and challenging thing to photograph. And I love that story because it reminds us that there's still so much we don't know about nature, even in a place where researchers have been living and observing outside, for 75 years, more than 75 years now that the station has been around. And yet we're still serendipitously discovering these things. So there's a lot out there to explore.
And that's why the ongoing research is so important, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Richard online is saying, are there any links to WRS social media that I should take a look at?
There sure are. I can paste them. I don't know whether I have access to a chat or maybe after the live stream in the comment section.
Or I even just off the top of your head. If you...
Yeah, well, the handle for...
what is the handle?
Yeah, the station's Instagram and Twitter handle is Algonquin WRS.
All one word?
Yes.
Algonquin WRS on Instagram and Twitter, right?
That's correct.
Okay,
yes.
awesome.
And then we also have a website that's algonquinwrs.ca.
Okay.
And the website will link you to all kinds of things. So you can sign up for our newsletter there. That's where we put the most amount of information and updates. And you get our annual report through there too. And there's also a link there where you can support the station on Patreon if you feel inclined.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you for that. Richard is also saying, I've seen the turtles with the racing stripes. You're talking about the turtles at Wolf Howl Pond. So yeah, people see them. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. And so I imagine that the average researcher takes photos for their research, but what makes your photography different from what the researchers are photographing?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, these days, most people have a cell phone that will take pretty good images. So, there's been a lot more documentation from scientists themselves of their work and sharing that publicly, which is great. But yeah, I guess there's a few things that make having an additional professional photographer with you. And I think the first is that it's actually kind of hard to photograph yourself. I mean, you can take a selfie, but there's only so much storytelling that you can do in that way. And so when you have someone else there who is photographing you doing your work, that's the kind of thing we want to see in a story, is you as a character and what you do for your work. So photographing that yourself can be pretty difficult. Not to mention that you already have, a full-time job being a scientist. So people who are out in the field doing field work as a scientist, even if you have other people with you, it's often really hard to fit in the photography aspect because, you have your hands full with the science. And there's a lot of images that go into telling a story, and that's where you can really connect with people, rather than having a single image of you doing your work. When you can really tell a story around that work, that's where you connect with people on more of an emotional level. And there's a lot of images that go into that story that go beyond just photographing you doing your work. So images of the wildlife that you're studying or the place where you're studying. So often a photographer is going to photograph a lot more than just you doing your work to tell a story about what you do and why it's important. Especially if there's some kind of conservation issue, then they can photograph the issue as well as your work, which is providing a solution. And then, to be honest, although cell phone cameras are great and people can make strong images with them, there is a lot of skill that does go into creating an image that has the full effect that an image can have. And so when you can really execute an image, when you really understand photography and understand visual storytelling, then you can create images that, have the effect that images have, and hopefully you can do a better job at bringing out the full effect of photography. And then, I'd say too, like if you have a photographer photographing your science, then once they photograph that story, they're really motivated and they're doing this full time. So they have the time to kind of promote your work and put those images out there. And so that can be another benefit as well, that go beyond, what scientists might think of, sharing their work with peers. So yeah, those are some benefits to having a photographer help you create images.
Yeah. And I know that you photographed research on really small animals like salamanders, for example. Why is the preservation of these tiny creatures important for the success of conservation? Does it matter if these tiny animals go extinct? And why do researchers panic when population levels of these creatures becomes threatened?
Yeah, I mean, it matters, definitely. Everything in nature is connected. And often we don't even know a lot of those connections. So, there's been a lot of instances in the past where we only realize the effect of losing something once we've lost it, and then it's too late, right? So, I think that conservation, you really have to look at it holistically. It doesn't really work to say, well, we're just going to protect the wolves, or we're just going to protect the moose, because, the moose depends on everything else in the environment. And salamanders specifically play a huge role in an ecosystem. I mean, a lot of people don't know because salamanders spend a lot of their life underground, and so you really don't see them that often. And so here in like the eastern forest, we actually were a salamander biodiversity hotspot, and those salamanders help break down like leaves and other stuff on the forest floor to make soil. And so they eat a lot of the things that break down the leaves that make soil, and so they like slow that process down, and they have a huge impact on it. And they're food for small mammals, and so they're very, everything in an ecosystem plays a role and is important. So we have to look at things holistically.
Yeah. And I'm on 100% on board with your with that answer that you just gave. And the reason why I asked that question is because I've totally met people who grumble about the fact that certain trail is closed because it's a sensitive turtle habitat or something like that. And I feel like all of these little creatures, like people question, what's the point? I can't, it's interfering with my recreational activities, right? And
Yeah.
and I love the way that you just put it, is that because like we can't even fathom really how we are all interconnected. Richard, who's watching the live stream right now, is agreeing the same thing. We are all connected, and I, as I said, I'm 100% on board with that. So I love hearing that answer from somebody like you that is so in, you're in the trenches of the research, right? So that's so cool. Can you give us some examples of how your conservation photography has been used in real-world scientific studies?
Yeah. So I would say, like, I guess looking at it from a high level, I think that the way that photography can really contribute is by being a tool to deliver the knowledge created by scientific study to the people who can benefit from that knowledge. So it's really this bridge between science and everything else, I guess. And I think, there is also a role to play, if you think about photography contributing to the science itself as well, because, at its most basic, wildlife science has a lot to do with being out in nature and observing something, and then, being curious about it and collecting those observations. And that's very similar to photography, right? So sometimes the best questions come from being out there and seeing something happening and then wanting to ask questions about it. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for photographers who are out there observing things to share their images with scientists. And, questions can come out of that. And then there's, as we were saying before, a lot of people these days have really good cameras, even just on their phone. So one project that my colleague led that I helped with was a project teaching people how to photograph bumblebees with their phone in a way where they capture all the parts of that bumblebee that are necessary to be able to identify what species it belongs to, and then how to upload those images to iNaturalist. So one of the barriers, I guess, with bumblebees that are at risk in Ontario is search effort. Just seeing if these bees are still out there and where they might be and how many there might be. So that's where you can really leverage the tool of citizen science, where people can go out and upload these observations. And that's data, that's scientific data. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for photographers and scientists to collaborate, to communicate science, but also for photographers to contribute directly to science.
Amazing. And so HOWL is all about promoting ethical wildlife photography. And as a photographer, you working on wildlife science stories, you get very close and intimate with animals. How do you maintain ethics in your research? How do you balance the different objectives, collecting scientific data and creating images while respecting your research subjects?
Yeah, that's a great question. So any researcher who's working with wildlife has to have permits. And in Algonquin, there's many different people that you need to have permits from: the university that you're affiliated with, the park itself. So there's a lot of thought and consideration that goes into asking, okay, how can we do the wildlife science in a way that's ethical, and how do we balance sort of the risk of disturbing wildlife with the knowledge that it can give us to protect that wildlife? So for me as a photographer, I mostly photograph science stories. And so often that starts by following the scientists in the field. And so that's beneficial for me to ensure that I'm photographing ethically, because I'm always with the people who are experts in that wildlife. And I rely on them, in addition to my own research, to make sure that I understand the animal behavior and know when something might not be good for wildlife. And then too, I also try to have conversations with the scientists that I'm photographing before we go out. So explain, these are the types of images and scenarios that I might want to photograph in. What do you think about that? Or are there certain things you're going to be doing that are too sensitive that I should, just back up and not be involved in? So I think communication for me with the scientists is the best tool I have to make sure that I'm doing things ethically. But then, that's one part. And then as photographers, we also have to make sure that the photos that we are making communicate what we want them to communicate and don't perpetuate negative ideas. So, some people have negative ideas about predators, and so you should have consideration around your images about how you're portraying predators. And is that perpetuating a negative view of them, or are you perpetuating something that's helpful to people changing their attitudes about those animals? So there's on the ground ethics, and then there's also the ethics of what you do with your photographs, and it's all a learning process, but there's a lot of people out there doing this work. And so when it comes to that second stage, talking to people, other wildlife photographers, can be your best tool to bounce ideas and learn from their experiences as well.
Yeah, amazing. I wish that all wildlife photographers were as mindful as that. And you, just by having you at the convention, I'm sure that there will be a lot of photographers that will probably absorb a lot of good information from you about how to be more ethical in the field. So yeah, we're just extra excited to have you in our lineup.
Yeah.
And earlier we were talking about salamanders. So your salamander photos in the picture plants are some of the most stunning and haunting wildlife photos ever. If you don't mind me asking, how did these images come about? You don't have to give away all of your secrets, but like just like the story of how they came to be.
Yeah. Well, firstly, thank you. I'm glad, I aim to create images that have an impact on people. So it's great, to hear you say that about those images. And yeah, how I made those images. I mean, when I first arrived at the station, this research was taking place. And so I was shadowing the researchers, going on their surveys with them day to day. And I made a lot of images of that project before I made those ones. It took a lot of really trying to figure out how to photograph that situation creatively, because it's a really difficult situation to photograph. I mean, if you've seen a pitcher plant, those things are tiny. There's a tiny opening.
Yeah.
Often the salamanders, they're not visible like that in the picture. They're sunk into the bottom. You can't see them. The researchers actually sometimes have to shine light through the picture or use a turkey baster. They suck up the fluid, they look at it, and then they put it back. So usually it's not visible like that. And this was just an exceptional moment for this picture leaf, in that the two salamanders were in a very short phase in decomposition where they float at the top of the fluid in the pitcher. And, the next day, both of those salamanders had sunk into the bottom of the pitcher. So it was really just about spending the time and investing the time, and recognizing when that moment happened. I was like, okay, here's the moment where I'm going to be able to make a picture. And those images, I didn't have, the only additional light I had with me was a headlamp.
Okay.
And the researchers had some headlamps. So how I lit that photo is there's actually multiple headlamps behind the picture leaf. And that's what gives the glow to the picture. So yeah, it's not always photography equipment that you end up using.
Oh, of course. And I mean, it just goes to show you how photography is more than just having a fancy camera and pushing a button. I mean,
totally.
In what you just said right there, with a collection of headlamps, you created this impromptu lighting that made this absolutely otherworldly, something out of a dream type of an image. Just so cool, so cool, and kind of sad too. I mean, they're dead, right? They're being. But it's also it speaks to the circle of life aspect of nature, right? I mean, this pitcher plant needs to eat, right?
Yeah,
so
it's got to eat. Circle of life.
It's just such a story in those research photos. So I just had to ask about that, because I don't know if anybody in the world's ever taken any photos like that look anywhere near like that. So anyways, I'm showering you with praise. This is well deserved. Yeah.
Very cool story.
Yeah, it's so cool. It's so cool. And then what are you going to be up to this season? You're going to be arriving at WRS kind of this month? And then what is the rest of your schedule like? Which are you going to be following, the salamander people or the turtle people or the wolf people? Who are you following around and documenting this time around?
Yeah, well, I will be heading up to the station soon, maybe this week,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll be based there. But I also have a couple of projects that are occurring in some other places in Ontario. So that'll be kind of my home base, and then I'll be doing some other excursions. And as I mentioned, I've been photographing the research on small mammals and turtles and salamanders, and I have some stories in the works that I need to finish up, which I can't tell you all of them right now, but hopefully the Instagram grid, which I think you have playing, I don't see it on my end, but that hopefully that Instagram grid will be updated in 2023. I can finally put some of the stories that I've been working on out there. So for me, 2023 is mostly about putting all the work that I've been doing the past couple of years out there finally, and doing that last phase of the storytelling.
Amazing. And without giving too much away, what are you going to be speaking about in your keynote presentation at HOWL 2023?
Yeah. Well, without giving too much away, I'll be sharing what I've learned about photography ethics through working on the
Nice.
projects that I've worked on. I think it's knowing how to photograph things ethically is a learning process, and we all learn from our experiences. So I'll be sharing that with everyone at HOWL, and then also expanding on what is traditionally included in considerations of ethics to also challenge people to think about how they can benefit the communities that are part of their stories that they're photographing, or affected by the stories that they're photographing. And yeah, try to think about how they can benefit those communities that are included in their photography.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Well, we cannot wait. And of course, tickets are still on sale for HOWL. Our website, howlphotocon.com, be taking place November 3rd, 4th, and 5th, 2023, right here in Whitney, Ontario, the closest settlement area to Algonquin Provincial Park. We're a stone's throw away from the park. It's definitely a hub of wildlife photography here. So if you're passionate about wildlife photography, definitely consider joining us at the convention. Oh, look at that. Richard says, got my ticket. Yes, Richard does have his
Awesome.
ticket. I'm
See you
sure.
there.
Yeah. Fantastic. And obviously we have the amazing presentations that we're going to be experiencing. We're going to have a really exciting interactive Q&A panel. But then there's a big social aspect behind the convention as well. We want to grow this community of mindful photographers, of ethical photographers, because I think conservation is so important. Oh, Kate out there, Buddha Monkey says, looking forward to it. Yeah, thank you, Kate. Yeah, we're gonna be so excited to have you as well. And yeah, everything that you said today, Sam, like just for you to share all of that at the convention, we're just so looking forward to it. So I really thank you for your time today to give us this little preview about what you're all about and what we could look forward to at the convention.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. It's gotten me even more excited about this November.
Awesome. Yeah. And and like you said, you're going to be debuting a lot of new photographs that you haven't been able to share due to contractual reasons. So yeah, we're just jittery with excitement about all of the newest, the freshest Sam Stevens conservation photography. Amazing.
Awesome.
Amazing. Okay, so before we sign off, I want to explain to the viewers where we can find all of your work. So your website is stevenssamantha.com. And if we want to add you on Instagram, that is Samantha Stevens _ correct?
Correct. Yes.
Perfect. So I'll just read that out for the folks out there one more time. stevenssamantha.com for Sam's website, or if you want to follow Sam Stevens on Instagram, it's simply Samantha Stevens _ and that's on Instagram. So perfect. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. We are so excited for your participation at HOWL 2023, and we just feel totally honored to have you there. So we thank you for agreeing to speak at the convention, and we'll be ready for you in November.
Sounds great. I'm ready for it too. So see you then.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you everybody for watching. We're signing out for the night, and we'll see you next time on the HOWL live stream.